political analyst from London, and Mr. Peter Dickinson, an expert at the Atlas Center for Studies in Kyiv. Together they explore the coalition's military, financial and diplomatic dimensions, unpacking what the upcoming summit could mean for the conflict's trajectory and for Europe's collective defense posture. Gentlemen, welcome to Think Tank. Mr. Emamian, how significant is London's hosting of this coalition meeting at this stage of the war?
I don't think it is significant at all. The whole purpose of it is to drag in US into the war. That's the whole purpose. Otherwise, it had no other function. And if we look at the situation on the ground, we could presume that Ukraine is already part of NATO. The way it's being helped by the Europeans, it is part of NATO by now, Ukraine. The only thing is Europeans haven't sent any troops yet. So this, and also the Europeans are under this presumption that there is the magic bullet or a silver bullet to end this war, or there is that war deciding weapon that could end this war, which doesn't exist. So while the Europeans want to escalate this war and dragging US into it, the Americans want to stay out of this war and they want to de-escalate, because for one thing we know for sure, wars are unpredictable and we don't know what happens. And if I may say something from Ernest Hemingway, when he talked about bankruptcy, he said, they asked him, how did you become bankrupt? He said, gradually and then suddenly. So we could use the same analogy and say, how did we eventually get to a nuclear exchanges, nuclear war, weapons exchanges? We could say gradually and then suddenly. So these are very dangerous times.
You've mentioned that the sole purpose of that meeting and that coalition is to drag the US into this war. Now, is there a political message that Britain is aiming to send by hosting and leading this gathering?
Well, as your guest said, the European strategy has been to take this war into Russia. And they believe by taking this war into Russia, somehow Russians will surrender or to go back. If anything, if we've read the history of Russia, Russians are very resilient, they are very adaptable, and we've seen every time there has been a change or a change in offensive towards Russia, they have readapted, regrouped, and come back. So if we say the Tomahawk missiles were given, and they used against, for example, Moscow or Petersburg, and they were hit. So what would Russia do in return? And what would NATO do if Russia start carpet bombing Kyiv? What would they do then? And NATO refuses to answer that question. The other question is, what happens if Russia attacks a capital in one of the NATO countries? What would be a proportional response? Would it be immediately escalate to a nuclear response, or would it be stages to that? So we are dealing with very serious situation. That's why the Americans are saying we must de-escalate, not escalate. For 4 years, we've been told by escalation, this war would stop. Every time the European intelligence has been wrong on the ability of Russians, whether on it they're hurting them economically or military. On both sides, they've been wrong, but they've been saying the same thing continuously, and I'm sure on Friday, they'll be saying the same thing again and again and again.
Well then, Mr. Emamian, what role does the US play in this coalition? Why is it being complicated, given some of the uncertainty in its commitments, but the US is willing to sell arms to the European countries or Ukraine? So is it a question of trying to influence the US into allowing more weaponry and more weapons, Tomahawk missiles also being on the market for them?
Thank you for your great question. First of all, President Trump has been saying this war should never have happened. The reason why he's been saying that, because according to him and others, that this was a territorial dispute. It was a border dispute, and somehow it escalated to a war, an ideological war about freedom and democracy. This should have been settled long ago through diplomacy. but the Europeans wanted a war with Russia, and it happened. Uh, and right now, President Trump has walked off because the way he sees it, Europeans are committed to escalating this war. So he has walked off and he said, I will supply you the weapons. He had said before, US would be in a great position to supply weapons to either side and just benefit. But they are not for war. President Trump is for peace and prosperity. He's not for escalating wars. He goes around the world trying to promote peace and prosperity. Yet the European leaders, they want to escalate this war. And the greatest threat to Europe is not Russia. It's slow economic growth and high energy cost. You look at the United Kingdom. We've had 6 prime ministers in 10 years. We've had 6 foreign secretaries in 5 years. Look at France. They can't have an effective government. They are falling apart, yet they want to fight this war instead of starting serious diplomacy with Russia. But they're not able to have diplomacy because they're not in charge of Europe anymore. NATO is in charge of Europe. Europe has no foreign policy, has no defense policy, has no domestic policy. NATO now runs Russia. It is run like a military junta right now. And the European leaders just love to hide behind NATO. And one more point I want to add. 20 years ago, to be General Secretary of NATO was something like 4th or 5th rank job. It was not a primary job. Now that is the top job in Europe. All the prime ministers or ex-presidents want to take that job now, to be General Secretary of NATO. How NATO has taken over the sovereignty of Europe, it's bad for Europe and for its sovereignty.
Yes. President Macron spoke of a possible reassurance force. What are the characteristics of this reassurance force, and how realistic is such a deployment under the current conditions?
Zero realistic. Throughout the last 4 years, we've seen no plan for peace, no plan for war either. So I agree with your guest that the West is weak because they have no leadership. They have no plan for either war or peace, and they have no idea what to do. All they know, the whole idea is to, as I said before, to drag in US and let them lead this war against Russia. Otherwise, and when you ask them what is the benefit of it, they say nothing. They say, oh, the Russia will be tomorrow in London. They'll be in Paris. When you say they can't even make it to Kyiv, for God's sake. And the maths is not there. In order for Russia to invade the entire Ukraine, they need an army of the size of 4 million. In order to have an attack on NATO, they need an army in the size of 15 million people. The maths is not there, yet they talk about Russian threat. Yes, couple of drones. Well, that was the NATO weakness, that they had no defense against drones. How could a NATO saying that they are so great at defending these countries, these NATO members, yet they had no plan against drones attacks? So in a way, again, I agree with your guest that Western Europe, or the Europeans mainly, they are weak because we have weak politicians with no leadership right now.
Mr. Emamian, you've raised some questions regarding NATO's effectiveness. Has the coalition of the willing evolved into a genuine alternative to NATO's slower mechanisms? And if so, do you think it would be more effective?
Well, the coalition of willings is carrying out Chinese policy, dragging US into a war with Russia. That's what they are doing. And that's the whole thing. And I disagree with your guest that President Trump is very clever. He's not going to get dragged into a war with Russia for the benefit of the Chinese. And that's what the Europeans are doing. The Europeans have been carrying out Chinese foreign policy for the last 3 years. And we've seen with all the Chinese spies here, they're not being even prosecuted. They are freely moving everywhere. And nobody's mentioning anything about the Chinese spies and infiltration into European system. And prior to President Trump, there was no China policy. The Europeans were giving away their communication system to the Chinese in form of 5G. It was President Trump who stopped them. So this idea that the Europeans are on the side of US, no, they're on the side of Chinese, and the whole idea is to get US dragged into a war with Russia, so then China can benefit from it, and they'll be free to do whatever they want to do. So no, I don't see anything. And also, I have to say, whether Prime Minister Keir Starmer or President Macron, they could easily start this diplomacy. And in any diplomacy, there are two sides, and there are incentives in order to achieve something, and you could negotiate. But right now, for the last 3.5 years, there has been zero negotiation on European side with the Russians. And now they are talking about seizing the frozen assets of Russia. And this is ridiculous. So what? Next thing, they're going to seize the assets of any country who has a territorial dispute. They're going to seize their asset. Like when it comes to India and Pakistan, they're going to seize their asset. Or Armenia or Azerbaijan, they're going to seize their asset because or what about Israeli assets? Because they're in war with Iran, they're going to seize the assets of Israelis. So these are policies that have been not thought through, and this is usually what the Europeans do. That's why we have weak leadership, because they come up with policy or slogans that they've not thought them through properly.
Yes, Mr. Babak Emamian from London and Mr. Peter Dickinson from Kyiv. Thank you, gentlemen, for your insights and your valuable time. As the